So this is nice to see you, everybody. This is just light entertainment before lunch. If you like, this is also death by PowerPoint. So if you like PowerPoint, you can email ben.page@ipsos.com, and I'm sure they'll also be on Civica's website. But you can do whatever you like, because I'll just run through this stuff and we'll think about it. I mean, every month we ask the great British public, without any lists, what is keeping them awake at night. And as you can see, Brexit is the number one obsession, closely followed by the NHS. I mean, it's interesting about Brexit that in February 2016, fewer than 1 person in 10 thought it was a big problem facing the country. And then, of course, the populace rose up and thrust it to the centre of everybody's attention. Overall, though, it's interesting. Migration is still there as an issue. What has been just a few years ago the number one issue, it's actually been receding as an issue, and our attitudes to immigrants, even before Brexit, have started to become a bit nicer. We've also got education, the economy, etc. I mean, the big picture, though, I think, in the country is of these two. And you have this sort of picture portrayed by the media the last 2 years of sort of, a populist right-wing revolt sweeping across Europe, sweeping across America, men of the people, 2 men of the people with the common touch in a golden lift, forced to enter politics, to take back control and, deal with the terrible people like us in this room who are just incompetent. And the interesting thing about this, of course, we've seen it all before. I don't know if there are any Italians in the room, but, if you look at Donald, for example, very, very rich, likes women a lot, forced to enter politics to drain the swamp. It reminds me a lot of somebody called Silvio Berlusconi, who may also be back in Italian politics as soon as March this year, so who knows. But you can portray this picture then of fragmentation, and in fact the election was another very dramatic example of that, the biggest age gap we've ever seen in an election. This is how people voted by age, so the older you were, the more conservative you were, and the younger you were, the more Labour you were. We are a nation split by age in many ways, certainly politically. And of course the election starts off, called in early April. I got a call, I was on holiday and I got a call from the BBC that she's going to announce an election this morning. What's going to happen? So I said, well, let's look at the numbers. The numbers show that currently Theresa May is better rated compared to Jeremy Corbyn than Mrs. Thatcher was compared to Neil Kinnock. She's better rated compared to Jeremy Corbyn than Tony Blair was compared to William Hague. She should improve her majority. That's what I said. And of course the other thing, the received wisdom in my industry is that actually general elections never change anything. The start of the campaign, the end of the campaign, I give you 2010 as an example, no shift at all. And we were just completely wrong. So this age, and it is partly this age gap, young people decided to vote this time. And the reason they decided to vote is they are fed up. In work we did for the Intergenerational Commission, we asked people, what do you think is going to be better for the millennials than their parents, and what's going to be worse? So better, they've got more stuff on their phones than we could have even imagined. This little black rectangle that contains all the information and music that we could have ever imagined. Those of us who spent our youth trawling around shops trying to find records and stuff, you don't need to do that anymore. They can travel abroad. My son, 22, has already visited all the continents on Earth. I didn't even go on a plane till I was 22. And deregulation has led to massive opportunities to travel. Education is better, so that's good. The trouble is the part of the chart I'm not showing. Going to own their own home, have a secure job, have a decent pension? Nah. And therefore, of course, why vote for the status quo if it isn't delivering anything for you? And if you don't remember that 1983 was traditionally seen as a bad year for the Labour Party because you weren't even born. If you don't even remember why New Labour, because actually all New Labour did was outsource everything and invade Iraq. So, we want some other thing. And, you've got a country where while we have record employment, while we have record low interest rates, we also have the highest spontaneous anxiety about poverty and inequality that we've ever measured, and you can see it rising up there from 2010 onwards. We have more people saying that they're worried about housing than we've ever measured. 74% of people say there's a housing crisis. 1 person in 5 now roughly spontaneously mentioning it. And for the very old in the room, that's the highest measure since the actual housing crash of the early 1970s, which some of us might just remember. So, this is a sort of strange world that we're in. But housing is definitely at the heart of it. A very regional issue, absolutely top of the list in London. rather differently played out in other parts of the country. Our infrastructure in this country needs spending money on, so we think we're quite good at airports and water and sewage. Flood defences, not so much. And new housing supply, we have one of the worst ratings in the world when we ask the public to rate how they think we're doing in terms of providing adequate new housing. So some real challenges, and things are changing. And I think one of the things that I was picking up in discussion last night, and from that very interesting panel discussion this morning, which I've just learned a lot from, is of course we are at this point of inflection. And as a historian, I think that the difficulty with history is that we're always too close to it to really discern what's happening until sometime afterwards. You can't see the wood for the trees. But listening to the sorts of narratives that we're hearing now, you can see that things are changing. And on house building, maybe having housing communities and local government, or whatever it's called, is going to make a difference. NIMBYism seems to be in retreat. Do you support or oppose more houses being built in your area? Opposition down from 46 to 21, support up from 28 to 56, because people have noticed their kids have nowhere affordable in many cases to live. The challenge, of course, in the public sector as a whole is that we have had now years of austerity, and particularly at a local level. And when we look at what people said 5 years ago about how happy they were with public services, just looking particularly at local government, because there's so many of you in the room, you can see there, road maintenance, our old favourite, has always been the worst rated thing local government does. Emptying bins, always quite good. Over the years, things have been pretty flat, but this is actually a piece of crunching for the National Audit Commission. When we look at the nets, we can see we've held up pretty well. Safety after dark actually improved slightly, but of course some big drops on value for money, services for older people, responsiveness, and obviously road maintenance, along with social care, is in other data some of the things that we've seen the biggest drops on. And I think that the question is, as we go into this next period, and it's true both in health and in local government, are we reaching some sort of tipping point where we fundamentally have to reinvent services, or are we going to finally see some of these drops in net satisfaction at a national level coming even more sharply? Because one thing that the election showed is that Britain is now fed up. In August, we had, worried that government's going to do too little to help people in the years ahead, 69%, up from 50% in May of 2010. And we're just tired. We're tired of austerity. We're worried that things aren't going to work out. We want to protect certain services. When we ask people, NHS is absolutely at the top of the list. Services for older people there at number 4, interestingly, but local government not very good at all. Now, of course, this is because people have absolutely no idea about most of what local government does, so we definitely need to rebrand that. But some real challenges, a little bit more flexibility on council tax, but it's not obviously going to solve the problem. We know that when it comes to the NHS, of course, 2 in 3 people say that they would personally, and this is the key thing, because you can often ask questions, would you like some more taxes to be spent on something? And most people say, yeah, I'll pay some more, let somebody else pay some more taxes on something. But this is actually personally paying more taxes. And I know that several key cabinet ministers absolutely agree with the idea of a hypothecated tax for the NHS. Whether that will ever happen, I don't know, but clearly we are at a point of inflection. And Brexit is still dividing Britain. And I think the problem with referendums is that they are dumb instruments, and they, of course, create, in some cases, a false divide. But it is interesting, you can see in terms of where the British are, we're very split still over whether it should be about trade and having access to the single market or stopping immigrants coming here. Now, the fact that the majority of immigrants to Britain do not come from the European Union but come from other places, which in theory we would have control over, doesn't seem to matter to people. But we can see a small movement to saying that the single market should be the number one issue, but it's not much, quite frankly. And what Brexit has revealed is that actually, of course, it was about emotion and not necessarily rational decisions in terms of the vote. So if you look at a question like, were things better in the past? If you're a Conservative Leave voter or a Labour Leave voter, half of you or more, 57, 55, 53%, saying things were better in the past. I liked Britain in the 1960s or the 1850s or some point in the past, No NHS, diphtheria, it was all sort of, I don't know, And of course the Remain voters, whether they're Conservative or Labour, say no, actually Britain wasn't better in the past. I tend to disagree with that. Immigrants take away jobs from real Britons. Now we have full employment, but if you're a Leave voter, Labour or Conservative, you will tend to say, yes, those migrants are coming here and taking those jobs, working in these hotels for low wages, taking those jobs picking vegetables that the Britons are keen to have. If you're a Remain voter, of course, you say nonsense. Big difference there, of course, between Labour Remain 40% strongly disagree, but even Conservative Remain, the majority, disagree with that. So we're split, not by party necessarily, but by our attitudes to Brexit, which are about something quite intangible and emotional. And there are other, on the other hand, there are some things, same survey, large differences in income are normal. To properly reward difference in talents and efforts, Labour say no, Conservative voters say yes. So on some things, party lines are pretty clear. On others, we are split right down the middle. So with all of that, I was sort of reflecting over Christmas, what does sort of hold us together, in this country? And actually, of course, what we should remind ourselves is that there are things that work for us and everybody agrees on. And of course, one is the thing that is the closest we now have to religion, the National Health Service. This survey is one that we did for a long time for the Department of Health, and they then got a bit bored of it. Tony Blair always wanted this blue line to go up when he was in office. He wanted people to sort of say, we need to fundamentally change it, and many people around him, as did Andrew Lansley when he became Secretary of State. But actually, the public, nah. We love the National Health Service. We love that it's not American. We love that it's free at the point of use. We like to fantasize that it's like the same everywhere, and we don't want things available in Scotland that are not available in London or not available in Devon. We want it to be the same everywhere, and it's something that binds us together. Other things, actually, Meghan Markle, the monarchy. Does that have an important role to play in the future of Britain? Absolutely rock solid. Small wobbles in 1998, but actually overall really not changing very much. So many of our institutions actually turn out to be stronger than we might have expected. Local government certainly has. And, actually the other thing is there are many things in terms of values that unite us. So are we okay about people getting married if they're the same gender? Yes, actually, 87% in Britain, and if anything, becoming more so. And it's only the Russians and Indonesians who are a bit upset about that. So actually there are many things where our values are shared in this country. We're less divided than we might think. Interestingly, despite whatever Michael Gove says, there's actually more trust in some experts. So doctors and teachers have always been trusted. Politicians, as you can see, not so much. I mean, it was interesting. We were doing this particular survey during the latest sex scandal when Damien Green's got into trouble and several other people got into trouble, sending their secretaries to buy sex toys and all this sort of stuff. But actually, of course, during that weekend, we found no difference in the data in trust in politicians. Politician does something dodgy, well, yeah, and... no difference there. But actually, trust in the clergy has declined over the last 30 or so years. But trust in professors, I don't know if Paul is a professor yet, but I'm sure he will be soon if he's not already. Trust in professors has actually gone up. Trust in scientists has gone up. Trust in the police has gone up. Trust in civil servants. Look at this, civil servants. Yes, Minister is no longer on television. As you can see, things have improved dramatically since then. And even the pollsters are still nestling in there in the middle, just below the police. So, interestingly, we aren't necessarily at a war of all against all and nobody trusting anybody anymore. Some things actually, like trust in politics, don't change as much as we might think. And it is this point of continuity and very dramatic change in some institutions like local government that I think poses us some challenge. Even business leaders, look, even that's got slightly better, plus 11. There you go, Wayne. But we are all, of course, at the mercy of what I'd call megatrends. And these are things that are sweeping over us. And again, we don't need to spend too long on them, but it is just a reminder that they're there. So technology, we don't know how many people will lose their jobs through self-driving vehicles if and when they roll out, or automation in factories. Nike is bringing back manufacturing to Germany from the Far East. Because it can now run factories so cheaply with machines, with very, very few people, that it's more more cost effective than to do that in the Far East with lots of people. Climate change going to happen. Imagine the hottest summer Manchester can ever remember, and just think of that as a normal summer from the mid-century, probably going to happen. Uneven economic growth, as Stephanie Flanders put it, of the BBC, economics expert. I think she was quoting an American, but it was, London is a great city attached to a crap country. But those gaps within regions, within Greater Manchester or between regions will go on. Population change is one area of statistics we can be very, very certain about. Europe is going to be the oldest continent on Earth. Absolutely guaranteed about that one. I will take any bet you want on that. That is going to happen. It's already in progress. Britain isn't quite so bad because we're into immigration. The Italians are not into immigration in a big way and will be extinct in 170 years unless they have more babies or get some more people to come and live with them. But that will happen. The Japanese have stopped giving out solid silver sake cups because that's what you used to get when you made 100. It's now nickel with a bit of silver plating because there are now so many people over 100. And of course, Brexit was supposed to stop globalization or was a sort of wail against globalization, a wail against migration and change. And again, all of those things are going to happen. So we've got to, at the here and now and next year's budget, not so relevant, but all sweeping over us. And some particular trends that we think organizations should focus on. First is this sort of just how much time people have. Human beings have only got 24 hours in the day. They have not discovered any extra hours. I mean, actually, that's a lie, actually. They've started sleeping less because they've got so busy. So we've actually managed to reduce the amount we sleep by about 1 hour over the last century. But the difficulty is that if you were trying to communicate with the public in the 1980s, you would have these sorts of things that you could use. You could send them, you could send them leaflets. You could perhaps go on TV. You could be in the media. You could put up some posters, etc. Now, you've got all of this stuff, and there are new things being invented literally every day for people to look at. But they've only got 24 hours in the day. And you've got to compete with all of those messages and things. We're trying to tell them to do worthy things, like be positive and go to the bowls club, eat your vegetables, recycle, go running with your neighbour who's got Alzheimer's, do all these good stuff. Meanwhile, they've got, sort of all sorts of interesting things to look at on these phones. And it's one of the reasons, possibly, why youth crime has gone down, because they're just indoors looking at pornography. But anyway... we all over the world. And so there are some key lessons. One message would be, very, very simple message. If you're into social media, I love Twitter. I need the dopamine hits of attention. I love pumping our stuff out there. But actually, I shouldn't bother, really. If I want to reach people, I should be on Facebook. Facebook is like one of the big oil or rail barons in America that had to be broken up at the beginning of the 20th century. 63% of the British public have gone to Facebook in the last month or so, and the highest for any of the others is Instagram, Twitter there at 22%. So if you're being slagged off on Twitter as a council, that's a bit of a problem. If you're being slagged off on Facebook, that's a much bigger problem. So get on Facebook. And underneath all of this is, and what we see with the public, is what we call the search for simplicity and control. All over the world, but particularly in the West, there is a sense that we are bombarded, the sense that life is overwhelming us, and that 66% of people say they want their life to be simpler. If you get Jonathan Ives, a great British designer, of course, who designs Apple's products, to come and speak to you, he's very interesting because he says, well, we only make this and Macs and, Apple TV and a few other bits and pieces. Seems pretty straightforward, really. You get a little box and you put some electronics in it, package it up, sell them by the score. But then he will show you the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of experiments on the corner of this device, how they chose the angle here, the software, how easy and addictive, of course, they made it. And once they got you into their evil infrastructure, they got your photos, music, and everything else. You will never escape. So but the reason it's attractive, and I'm a happy prisoner of Apple almost, is simply because it's so simple and easy. And how can we make those services like that? I've just had to open a Euros account. My bank told me, one of the big four, we're not doing Euros accounts anymore. It's not cost effective. I found some people in Dublin. I've opened the account, took my photo of my passport, took 2 bills, sent them the photos. The account's open, and the credit card for the account arrived 2 days later. I did it all in about 10 minutes. Trying to set up my accounts with you, prove that I am who I am might be more difficult, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And the challenge, I think, is that the expectations people have are rising because they know that now that sort of thing can happen. We've seen this in the past in local government around things like answering the phone. In the 1970s, answering the phone was a sort of random thing we occasionally did. We then learnt to answer the phone because it became more important and more expectations, but we will need to think about that. We've got 27% who say they now never put up with poor service. And at the same time, of course, paranoia about data all over the world, people worried about where their data's going. Interestingly, they worry but don't do anything about it. So around only about 15% of these people who say that they're worried about how the data is being used have ever changed any browser settings or software settings on any of the apps they're on, but they're still worried about it. And losing people's data, I'm sure it will never happen to any of us in this room, is something that people actually mind more than paying yourself millions of pounds, using child labour or destroying palm forests. So that is a real challenge. But so it's their anxiety, but at the same time we've got to do it. We like it when it's cool, when things join up seamlessly and it works well, but we don't like it when it's creepy. I've noticed your child is 4, he lives in a high crime area. Statistically, he's very likely to go to jail. Could we have a conversation? Allegedly there is a map in the Home Office showing who's going to jail in 20 years' time, and they know where they're being born now. So, you face these challenges. I know local government will deal with them, as it always does, because we are immensely practical people. And I think we are at this point of inflection. We are too close, I think, in one way, to know what's going to change and what's actually enduring and staying the same way. And it makes us very insecure, which you can see in Britain. I mean, yes, we have a cut in real wages, but actually, at least it was a cut in real wages from a relatively prosperous time. So yes, our growth, the growth in real wages is as bad as it's been since 1860, or in some cases, the Napoleonic Wars, but I'd much rather be poor in the early 20th century or 21st century than, say, in the early 19th century. But at the same time, I think one of the things that we should remember is our culture, and actually many of the things, even in Brexit Britain, are things that unite us, and even with a polarity between wealthier and poorer people. The first is that people want to feel proud. We are a country of people who are sort of secretly very, very proud. But we aren't American. We don't go around sort of putting flags on our lawns. But we have these moments like the Olympics when suddenly we're allowed to feel good about ourselves. And we do. And I think we should try and build on that. It's also, I think, true and interesting that traditional British institutions, and I will include local government in that, I will include the NHS, the BBC, the monarchy, and the army, being slagged off on the radio today for being nice to gay people. Actually, all of those things are much more resilient than we might think. And when you ask people in Britain, compared to any other English-speaking country on earth, the Americans, Canadians, New Zealanders or Australians, you ask them, what makes you proudest about this country? It is actually many of our state institutions. Not the case in America. In Australia, it's just the weather. Which it isn't here. So these things are actually more adaptable, and I think that is part of course, local government's relative success story over the last 30 years. So I think we've got lots to do, but there's lots of things we can do, even if money's tight. And of course, my final thing would just be this one. The greatest insanity, as Einstein puts it, is to keep repeating the same thing over and over again, the same experiment over and over again, and expecting something different to happen. Try something different. Thank you very much.